Hello and welcome to TerraNash. I'm Aiden, your narrator for tonight. Let's take this time together to step away from the rush of the day and ease into a world of dreams and wonder. Tonight, I'll tell you a story set in a quiet village tucked deep within an ancient forest where an old apothecary shop holds more than potions and herbs. Among the shelves lined with glass vials and dried petals lies a secret, a whispering voice sealed in a bottle, waiting to be heard. This is the Whispering Vials, a medieval tale of mystery, magic, and the gentle courage of a young apprentice named Elowen. But before we begin, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening from, and what time is it as you settle in to hear this story? We'd also love to know what kinds of stories you'd enjoy next. Your thoughts and suggestions inspire us, so please share them in the comments below. If you'd like even more from us, you can check out our Patreon for early access to all our stories and a curated Spotify playlist as well. And if you've been enjoying our bedtime stories, subscribing is a simple and free way to support us. Your support means the world to us, and together, we can make TerraNash an even more peaceful place for storytelling. Now, wherever you are, make yourself comfortable. Let your shoulders drop, unclench your jaw, and let your breath grow slower and deeper. Close your eyes if you'd like, or soften your gaze. Let the soft glow of candlelight and the scent of old wood and herbs guide you deeper into a quiet, magical place. The stars have risen above Elderhollow. The wind stirs gently through the trees, and in the apothecary at the edge of the village, something is whispering. Let's begin. The village of Elderhollow slumbered beneath a canopy of ancient trees, where moss crept over cobblestone and ivy wrapped itself around the bones of forgotten walls. Morning mist often lingered until noon, and the air always smelled faintly of pine, damp earth, and something else, something unnameable that clung to the corners of dreams. At the very edge of the village, half swallowed by forest, stood the apothecary shop of Master Thorn. It was a place of low ceilings and crooked beams, warmed by the constant crackle of a hearth that never quite stopped burning. The sign above the door read, "Remedies and Restoratives," painted in faded gold letters, though few in Elderhollow ever called it that. Most simply said, the Apothecary. Elowen, Thorn's young apprentice, had begun her day like any other, carefully lighting the lanterns in the hallway, sweeping last night's dust from the stone floor, and setting out fresh bundles of lavender to dry above the window. Her hands moved with practiced ease, but her thoughts wandered. She'd been dreaming again. Dreams full of soft voices and glowing bottles. Dreams that always left her waking with a weight behind her ribs she couldn't explain. The shop was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the wood or the rustle of herbs swaying in the draught. Dozens of vials lined the dark wooden shelves, each carefully labelled in Thorn's meticulous script. Most contained familiar things: powdered chamomile, tincture of thyme, bark shavings soaked in honey. But there were others. Bottles sealed with red wax or black twine, bottles that were never touched. These had no labels. They simply were. As she dusted the third shelf near the far window, Elowen paused. A faint sound, soft as a sigh, brushed against her ear. She turned, expecting to find the wind had caught the window again, but it remained tightly shut. She listened, heart suddenly quiet in her chest. There it was again, a whisper. It was not a word, not exactly, but it carried something like a voice. It came from one of the higher shelves, nestled between a pale green vial of crushed mint and a small jar of star anise. The bottle in question was unlike the others. It was glass, yes, but darker, like smoke had been trapped inside. Its cork had been sealed in thick black wax, now brittle with age. No label, no twine, just silence, and that strange, shivering whisper. Elowen. She nearly dropped her feather duster. The whisper was clearer now, gentle, calling her name. She leaned in, hands trembling slightly, but didn't touch it. Something about the vial pulsed, like it was breathing or waiting. The air around it felt cooler, and for a moment, the scent of thyme and sage was drowned out by something older, sweeter, and stranger, like rain on stone and wilted violets. "Apprentice," came Master Thorn's voice from behind her, low and steady. "Step away from that shelf." Startled, Elowen obeyed, snapping upright and turning quickly. Thorn stood in the doorway, eyes shadowed beneath the hood of his long grey robe, his expression unreadable. "Those vials are not for handling, not yet." Elowen opened her mouth to speak, but the words dissolved before they could form. Master Thorn's gaze lingered a moment longer before he turned away, disappearing down the hallway that led to his private workroom. "Come," he called over his shoulder. "There's much to be done today." But as Elowen followed him, her thoughts remained behind, with the vial that had whispered her name. And though she could no longer hear it, she felt its presence pressing gently at the edges of her mind, like the weight of a forgotten dream. Elowen couldn't sleep that night. Though the hearth in her little loft room above the apothecary glowed softly, and her straw mattress was layered with thick wool blankets, her thoughts kept circling back to the whispering vial. She lay still with her eyes open, listening to the wind rustling through the forest outside, and the familiar creaks of the old shop settling into sleep. But beneath those sounds was something quieter, fainter. A memory of her name spoken in a voice too soft to belong to any living thing. By morning, she was no closer to understanding what she had heard. And Master Thorn, as always, offered no answers. He never did. His days were measured in roots and bottles, crushed petals and old parchment. He was kind in his way, but distant, as though he carried the weight of the forest in his shoulders. That afternoon, a widow came in with her little boy, who had a cough that wouldn't quit. Thorn prepared a syrup of honey and licorice root, while Elowen fetched a warming balm from the back. As the customers left, Elowen turned to ask about the vial, but Thorn was already returning to his workroom, closing the door behind him with a gentle but firm click. Left alone in the main shop, Elowen wandered back to the shelf where the black waxed vial sat. She didn't dare touch it again. Instead, she watched it, waited. Hours passed. Sunlight slid across the wooden floor, and shadows began to stretch as dusk approached. Then, just as the final rays of day filtered through the ivy-covered window, it began again. A murmur, a sigh. Not her name this time, but something sad, almost like an apology. She leaned in close. The whisper was clearer now, though still too soft to make sense of. But Elowen noticed something else. The other vials near it. They were trembling. Just slightly, as though stirred by a breeze that didn't exist. She stepped back and let her eyes drift over the shelves. It wasn't just that one vial. She began to notice them all. The ones sealed in wax, the ones tucked between more common herbs. On quiet nights, they whispered. Once, she'd believed what the villagers believed, that the shop's strange vials were merely old charms, bits of folklore preserved in glass. But now, hearing the soft swirl of sound slipping between them, she was no longer sure. There was a rhythm to their whispers, a pulse, almost like breath. She remembered something Master Thorn had once told her when she'd first arrived. Not every bottle holds a potion, child. Some hold time. Others hold memory. A few. He'd never finished that sentence. A gust of wind rattled the shutters. The candle beside her flickered, then calmed. Elowen's fingers hovered near the black waxed vial. She still didn't touch it, but her curiosity had rooted itself deeper. These vials weren't charms. They were stories. And one of them, this one, was trying to tell hers. The next evening, when Master Thorn retired early with a headache and the shop fell into stillness, Elowen moved quietly. She lit only one candle, shielding it with her hand as she passed through the shop so its glow wouldn't betray her from the street. Outside, the wind carried the soft sighs of the forest. But inside, A deeper hush hung between the shelves. The vials slept, most of them, but the one sealed in black wax pulsed faintly in the low light, like a creature breathing in sleep. Elowen hesitated. Her fingers hovered just above it, her heart skipping a quiet beat. Then, gently, she reached for the vial. It was cold, colder than glass should be, as if it held winter itself. As she lifted it from the shelf, she could feel a strange weight inside, not of liquid or powder, but of something unnameable. She stared at the wax-sealed cork and held her breath. "I'll be careful," she whispered, as though to the vial, or perhaps to herself. And then she peeled away the black wax. The moment the cork gave a soft pop, a thin tendril of silver mist escaped, rising slowly into the air like smoke from an ancient fire. It hovered for a heartbeat, for two, then began to swirl. Not fast, not frightening, graceful, measured. The mist curled around her wrist and climbed through the air, forming the vague suggestion of a face. Gentle eyes, a faint outline of a mouth, and then a voice emerged. Soft, tired. "Thank you." Elowen froze. The mist hovered before her, and though it flickered and shifted, the presence within it was unmistakably real. "You're not afraid?" the voice asked, curious, almost amused. "No," Elowen whispered, though her hands trembled. "What are you?" "I was once like you, an apprentice, a healer, an alchemist. My name is Lysander." The mist pulsed gently in response to its name, like a breath in the air. "I've been asleep for a long time," Lysander continued. "Too long. I don't know how many years have passed, but the forest feels older. The shop smells different. You're not him." Elowen blinked. "Him? The one who sealed me here?" Her breath caught. "Master Thorn." The mist shifted uneasily. "Perhaps, or someone before him. There were many before you. Many who came and left, but only one ever trapped me." Elowen sat slowly on the wooden stool by the hearth, still clutching the uncorked vial. The silver mist drifted beside her, like a ribbon in the wind. "Why were you sealed away?" she asked. "Because I knew something I wasn't meant to know. I practiced something I wasn't meant to touch. Soul binding. A forgotten art. Dangerous, yes, but not evil." The word hung heavy in the air. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," Lysander said softly, "but I had discovered a way to preserve voices, memories, a way to keep stories from being lost to time. I never meant to become one." Elowen looked at the vial again, the black wax now crumbled to dust beside her. So you were trapped. I was silenced. They sat together in the quiet, one girl, one soul, beneath the amber glow of a single candle. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, but within the apothecary, something older had awakened. Elowen felt it in her bones. This was no ordinary vial, and Lysander was no ordinary whisper. This was the beginning of something deeper, something long buried. And now that it had been uncorked, it would not be sealed again. In the days that followed, Elowen kept the uncorked vial hidden beneath a loose floorboard in her loft, wrapped in velvet to quiet its glow. Lysander's voice came to her in moments of stillness, just after waking, or while stirring tea leaves into warm water, or when the last candle was guttering into wax. He never shouted, never demanded. He simply spoke. He told her stories of herbs long forgotten and rituals once whispered in the shadowed groves beyond Elderhollow. He described how, long ago, apothecaries were more than healers. They were memory keepers, stewards of soul and soil. Magic wasn't always fire and spectacle, he said. Sometimes it was as simple as knowing which root would calm grief, or how to bottle a lullaby before it slipped away. But when Elowen asked about soul binding, Lysander grew quiet. It was a last resort, he finally said one evening, as rain tapped gently on the shop's windows. A way to preserve what must not be lost. Words that needed to survive, even if the speaker could not. I tested it first on myself, on my own memory. I was afraid of dying before I could pass it on. She sat cross-legged on the attic floor, her fingers tracing the spine of her worn journal. And someone didn't approve. Lysander's mist shimmered faintly from within the cloth. He feared what others would do with it, that if soul binding became known again, power-hungry hands would twist it into something cruel. And perhaps he was right. Elowen lowered her voice. But locking your soul in a vial, wasn't that cruel too? Silence fell. Not cold, not angry, just still. Yes, Lysander finally whispered. But fear often wraps itself in righteousness. That night, Elowen dreamed of glass vials hanging from the branches of the elder tree, each one glowing with a soft light and humming with voices of the past. In the dream, the wind rose and they began to sing, not in fear, but in longing. The next morning, she awoke with a certainty in her chest, like coals warming to flame. She needed answers, not whispers, not fragments. Truth. She went to the back of the shop where Thorn kept his oldest texts, tucked away in a cabinet behind dried bundles of foxglove and valerian. It was locked, of course. But Elowen had spent years watching the way he turned the iron key with a particular twist of his wrist. She mimicked it with a slender bone pin and felt the satisfying click. Inside were books darker than the rest. Not in colour, but in content. Heavy leather-bound volumes with names long rubbed away. One, though, remained intact. The edges curled with age, its title barely legible in faded ink, of breaths preserved and bottled souls. Her heart beat faster. She read until her eyes ached, until her candle became a pool of gold on the floor. The book spoke of rituals performed under certain moon phases, of spells requiring a piece of memory. Hair, a tear, the final breath of a dying word. The process was delicate, the consequences irreversible, and yet, if done properly, release was possible. A soul, once bound, could be guided home. But it required two things: the original alchemical seal and the binder's remorse. Elowen closed the book slowly. Her hands trembled not from fear, but revelation. Master Thorn knew he had to. And if he was the one who sealed Lysander away, then he was the only one who could set him free. But would he? Or would the fear that once sealed a soul still hold its grip after all these years? As the candle flickered low and shadows danced across the shelves, Elowen whispered a promise into the velvet folds of cloth beneath her floorboard. I will find a way, even if he won't. And from within the vial, the faintest echo of a whisper answered back, I believe you. It was market day in Elderhollow, and the village square stirred with quiet energy. Wagons creaked, chickens clucked, and traders called out their wares beneath grey sky and crooked banners. Elowen stood at the apothecary stall, arranging jars of rosemary salve and healing teas with half a mind on her work. Her other half was still back in the shadows of the shop, sifting through what she'd learned, replaying Lysander's voice in her mind like a lullaby threaded with secrets. Then she saw him. A man cloaked in grey, edges of his garb damp with forest mist, stood a few paces away. His hood was low, obscuring most of his face, but what she could see was strange. His skin was pale, almost ashen, and his gloved hands moved with delicate precision as he fingered a small vial from a merchant's table. He didn't speak, didn't haggle. He simply paid, pocketed the bottle, and turned to the next. Elowen's breath caught. Something about him felt wrong. He lingered too long near her stall, his attention drawn not to the labelled jars, but to the older ones in the wooden chest behind her. The ones they rarely brought out. He tilted his head slightly, and though his eyes were hidden, She could feel his gaze settle on her. "This one," he said at last, voice like velvet wrapped around a blade. "You deal in rarities." "We deal in remedies," she replied, voice measured. "For healing." "Ah," he mused, tapping a finger against a sealed jar. "But healing takes many forms. Some wounds aren't of the flesh." Before she could respond, Master Thorn stepped forward from behind the stall. "She is not for questioning, and that chest is not for trade." The stranger turned toward Thorn, slow and calm. "You still speak in riddles, old one, just as you did in the days of the glass circle." Thorn's eyes darkened. "Those days are over." The man smiled beneath his hood. "Are they?" He turned, then, with a swish of cloak and an eerie stillness, vanishing into the crowd like morning fog retreating from the sun. That night, the shop was unusually quiet. Even the vials seemed subdued, their whispers held in breathless silence. Thorn didn't speak of the stranger, but his hands trembled slightly as he crushed dried valerian, and he added 2 extra locks to the front door. Elowen crept downstairs long after he retired. The candlelight flickered nervously as she moved between the shelves. Something felt disturbed. Then she saw it. A vial on the lowest shelf, small, clear, wrapped in green twine, was broken. Its contents spilled across the stone floor in a dull shimmer. She rushed to it, heart sinking. The wax seal was shattered, the liquid gone. But worse than the mess was the silence. This vial had whispered to her once, soft and melodic. It had always hummed a little, like a lullaby from a forgotten garden. Now it was quiet, utterly quiet. She knelt beside it, hand trembling as she gathered the pieces, and in the silence, Lysander's voice returned. "He's begun." "Who?" she whispered. "The collector. He hunts the bound ones, not to free them, but to possess them, to drain what knowledge remains." Elowen felt something tighten in her chest. This wasn't just about one soul in a bottle. There were others, hidden, trapped, sleeping, and the masked man wanted them all. She stood slowly, the broken glass in her palm catching the candlelight. The whispers were not just remnants of the past, they were warnings. And the shop at the edge of the trees was no longer just a place of herbs and healing. It was a battleground, quiet, fragile, and sacred, and something dark had found its way in. The shop felt colder the next morning, though no window had been left ajar. A stillness clung to the walls, the kind that follows after something sacred is disturbed. Master Thorn said little as he prepared the day's tinctures, his movements stiff, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. Elowen, however, moved with quiet determination. The broken vial haunted her. Its silence was louder than any whisper. She knew she couldn't wait any longer. If there were more souls hidden in these vials, if more were at risk, she had to understand the magic behind them. And that meant finding answers Thorn would never willingly offer. That evening, once the shop was shuttered and the last embers in the hearth had dulled to crimson, Elowen returned to her loft. She paced for a long time, torn between fear and resolve, until at last she lit a single candle and knelt beside the floorboard beneath her cot. She'd hidden Lysander's vial there, yes, but she'd always suspected there was more beneath the wood than just empty space. She ran her fingers along the cracks, feeling for the subtle dip in the grain, the soft give of something long forgotten. Then, with a careful tug, the board came loose. Beneath it lay a velvet-wrapped bundle, far too large to be a vial. Her hands trembled slightly as she unwrapped it. A book. Its cover was deep brown, nearly black, leather stretched over thick parchment pages. No title marked the front, but as she opened it, the scent of lavender and ash rose from within. The pages were filled with diagrams, sigils, and delicate ink scrawlings, notes written by many hands over centuries. Lysander's voice came softly, almost reverent. "You found it. You knew it was here." I hoped. The Circle always kept one copy, a grimoire of preservation and release. Elowen flipped through the fragile pages, heart pounding. Here were rituals she'd never been taught, potions that preserved voices, spells that captured final thoughts. And deeper in, between entries written in a tighter, more desperate hand, she found it. The soul-binding ritual. She read aloud in a whisper. To bind the soul, one must catch the final breath of memory, wrap it in symbol, and seal it with intent. To release, one must call the soul home by unweaving the binding sigil and offering the binder's remorse. She paused, frowning. The binder's remorse. "It's the only way," Lysander murmured. "The bond is made from will, and only a willing heart can unmake it." "But if Thorn won't admit he did it, then I remain." Elowen closed the book gently, running her fingers over the ink that had likely not seen light in generations. It was all here, everything she needed to understand what had been done, and possibly to undo it. She glanced toward the darkened window. Somewhere beyond the woods, the collector was still out there, breaking bottles, stealing whispers, and here she was, a quiet girl in a crooked-roofed shop, holding a book the world had tried to forget. But the silence beneath her floorboards was broken now. The truth had been unburied, and with it, Elowen knew her part in this story had only just begun. The wind howled through Elderhollow that evening, scraping branches against the windows like skeletal fingers. Inside the apothecary, the hearth blazed, yet the warmth it offered did little to chase away the unease that clung to the walls. The candlelight flickered strangely, dimming and swelling in pulses that didn't match any draft. Elowen noticed it first, how the flame above her workbench trembled whenever she passed near the sealed vials. It was as if they sensed something, or someone. Master Thorn had been unusually quiet since the market. His eyes remained shadowed, his mouth drawn, and he'd spent much of the day behind the locked door of his private room. When Elowen brought him tea, she caught a glimpse of the space within. Shelves of unfamiliar vials, a map of Elderhollow tacked to the wall, and in the center, a vial that glowed with a pale, pulsing blue. He looked up just as she entered, his face caught between surprise and shame. "You shouldn't be in here," he said. "I wasn't," she replied gently. "Not really." Their eyes met. For a moment something passed between them, regret perhaps or fear. But Thorn turned away, and the door was quietly shut once more. That night, just before midnight, the first light vanished. Elowen had left a candle burning on the shop counter. One moment it danced steadily in the window, and the next, it simply ceased to exist. No smoke, no flicker, just gone. Then another, and another. All across Elderhollow, the lanterns blinked out one by one. The inn, the blacksmith's porch, the chapel tower. The village fell into unnatural darkness, as if the stars themselves had been swallowed. Elowen stood at the shop's threshold, clutching the grimoire to her chest, heart thundering in her ears. The collector had returned. She didn't know how she knew. She just did. The silence had a presence. She hurried inside and reached for the sealed vials, checking them quickly. Most were intact. But one, the smallest, sealed in red wax and strung with copper thread, was missing. Lysander whispered in her mind, urgent and low. "He's in the village." She ran to the back, heart pounding, and flung open the cabinet Thorn had forbidden her to touch. Inside were vials Elowen had never seen, dozens of them, some cracked, some empty, and one, still sealed, still glowing faintly, marked with a tiny etching that matched the sigil in the book. A soul-bound vial. Footsteps echoed on the path outside, not hurried, measured, confident. Elowen blew out the lantern and crouched beside the cabinet, holding her breath. Through the sliver of the shop's curtain, she saw a figure pass, cloak dragging, mask pale and smooth like bone. He paused at the door. Then, without knocking, he moved on. Elowen exhaled slowly, her hands cold. The collector had come not to take a vial, but to remind them he could, any time he wished. When she looked up, Thorn was standing behind her, silent. "He'll keep coming," she said softly, "until they're all his." Thorn nodded, weariness heavy in his posture. "I know." Elowen lifted the book. "There's a way to stop this. Not just to protect the vials, but to free them. We can end the bindings." He didn't speak for a long time. Then finally, in a voice that trembled like the flame of that vanished candle, he said, "I don't know if I'm ready to face what I did." "You don't have to be ready," Elowen replied. "You just have to be willing." Outside, the wind began to howl again. The stars were still absent, but within the shop, beneath the weight of shadow and silence, something else had returned. Hope, faint and flickering. And it would be enough. The apothecary was still when Elowen rose before dawn, the first light of morning not yet gracing the sky. The darkness was gentler now, not from the absence of fear, but from the quiet understanding that it had been named. Thorn had not yet spoken of the past, but he had not locked his door last night. That, in its own way, was a beginning. Elowen moved through the shop with steady hands, gathering ingredients she had memorized from the grimoire. Moon petal, dried under silver light. Thorn root, steeped in salt. A vial of morning dew collected from the eastern side of the forest. And last, the rarest of all, memory glass, a translucent shard kept wrapped in linen in the lowest drawer of the apothecary's sacred cabinet. It shimmered faintly when held in silence. She brought the items to the brewing room, where a copper cauldron rested on a circle of ancient runes carved into the stone floor. She had read about this potion in the hidden pages, a brew of memory and moonlight. It wasn't meant to heal or bind, but to reveal, to open the mind to the memories of another, even if that memory was suspended in time. The process was delicate. The potion had to be stirred counterclockwise with a branch from an ash tree and heated only with fire drawn from a candle that had never spoken, that is, one which had never been lit in the apothecary's presence before. She lit it now, whispering a soft blessing as she did. The flame took slowly, as if unsure it wished to be awake. Lysander's voice came, softer than usual. "Are you certain?" Elowen nodded, though no one could see. "You said it yourself. I need to understand what happened. Not just what was done, but why." She added the last drop of dew and watched the brew shimmer into a soft lavender hue. When it began to steam with the scent of honey and rain, she dipped a wooden spoon in and drank. It was warm and cool all at once, sweet at first, then bitter as frost. Her vision blurred. The room folded inward. And then she stood, not in the apothecary, but in a memory. She saw the shop as it had once been, brighter, younger, the shelves filled with vials that gleamed like starlight. A young Thorn stood by the hearth, arguing with someone whose presence filled the room with warmth and intensity. Lysander. He wasn't mist now. He had a face, a voice, a body. His hands were stained with ink and powdered petals, his eyes lit with the excitement of discovery. "I've done it," he said, breathless. "I've captured the echo of a soul. Just the echo. Nothing more. A whisper to pass on. We don't have to lose their wisdom anymore." But Thorn was pale, shaken. "You don't understand what you've done. If this falls into the wrong hands..." "It's not dark magic," Lysander argued. "It's memory. It's protection. You're playing with the border between life and death," Thorn snapped. "And one day, you won't come back from it." There was a silence between them then, deep and painful. Thorn moved toward the shelf, picked up a sealed vial, the same vial Elowen now kept beneath her floorboard. "You leave me no choice," he whispered. And with trembling fingers, he whispered an incantation, a seal, a prison. Lysander tried to speak, to stop him, but the words caught in his throat. His body shimmered, his voice fractured. The vial glowed, and then dimmed. Elowen gasped as the memory faded, the shop folding back into itself. She stumbled against the counter, breath shallow. Lysander's voice came, barely audible. "I didn't know how deeply he feared it." "I saw it," she whispered, pressing her hand to her chest. "He did it out of fear, not malice. But he regrets it still." She looked towards the back room where Thorn now slept, or waited, or perhaps listened. Elowen wiped her hands on her apron, steadying her breath. She had seen the truth, and it hurt. But now she could speak it, and she would. The sun crept over Elderhollow like a shy guest, filtering through the trees in soft gold ribbons. Birds called gently from the forest's edge, and for a fleeting moment, the village seemed untouched by the weight of secrets. But in the apothecary, the air was thick with something unspoken. Elowen stood by the window, cradling the soul-bound vial in her hands. The weight of it was no longer frightening. It was familiar now. Heavy, yes, but not unbearable. Master Thorn entered quietly, his robe dusted with dried lavender, the smell of clove and grief trailing behind him. He paused in the doorway, his eyes falling to the vial. No words passed between them for a long time. "I saw it," Elowen said softly. He didn't ask what she meant. He simply nodded. "I didn't know what else to do," he finally whispered, voice hollow with time. "He was my dearest friend, and I thought, I believed, I was saving him from himself, from what others would do with his discovery. You were trying to protect what you loved, she said. But in doing so, you locked it away. Thorn sat at the old oak table, his hands resting flat, fingers slightly curled. I've thought of freeing him 1,000 times, but the ritual, it requires me to admit I was wrong. And the longer I waited, the harder it became. You don't have to speak it to me, Elowen said. You need only speak it to him. She placed the vial on the table between them. Lysander's mist began to rise, faint and silvery, swirling softly like breath on a cold morning. Thorn stared at it for a long time, and then, without looking away, he whispered, "I'm sorry." The mist pulsed gently. "I bound you not out of anger," Thorn continued, voice breaking, "but out of fear. I feared what you would become, or what you might lead others to become. But in silencing you, I lost your friendship, and I've carried that silence ever since." Elowen opened the grimoire and laid the final page bare, the ritual of release. Together, she and Thorn prepared it. Candlelight flickered in time with their breath, the runes traced in salt and ink. The potion warmed with gentle fire. When the moment came, Thorn placed his hand over the vial, and Elowen placed hers over his. They spoke the incantation in unison, their voices soft but steady. The final words carried a note of mourning, but also of release. The vial shimmered, the mist lifted, and Lysander's voice returned one last time. "Thank you." The silver glow drifted toward the ceiling, then dissolved into the golden morning light. Elowen closed her eyes, the silence that followed not empty, but peaceful. Thorn wept quietly, not from sorrow, but from the slow unraveling of regret. When the final wisp was gone, the shop felt lighter. The vials on the shelves no longer trembled. The whispers, for the first time in memory, had fallen silent. But it was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of peace. Spring arrived gently in Elderhollow. The trees wore crowns of new green, and the forest, once cloaked in silence, now sang with birdsong and budding life. The apothecary, too, had changed. Its shelves were still lined with vials and jars, but the whispering had ceased. Where once soft voices stirred the stillness, now there was calm, peace, the kind that follows after a long-held breath has finally been released. Elowen stood behind the counter, tying a bundle of fresh sage with twine, her movements easy, unhurried. The old shadows no longer pressed at the corners of the shop. In their place was light, open windows, a new warmth. The villagers still came, still brought their ailments and their stories. But more often now, they stayed longer. Not because they needed healing, but because the shop had become a place where silence was kind, and listening meant more than curing. Thorn, though slower now, remained a steady presence. He no longer kept the back room locked. The grimoire, once hidden beneath floorboards, now sat open on a low reading shelf for those curious enough to learn. And every so often, he would rest a hand on it as he passed by, as though in silent thanks. The collector was never seen again. Whether he had found what he sought elsewhere, or whether Lysander's release had marked the end of his pursuit, no one knew. But Elderhollow was no longer vulnerable. The magic once buried had returned, not in power, but in wisdom. In the quiet strength of memory shared and burdens unsealed. Elowen walked each morning to the edge of the forest, where the elder tree stood tall and quiet. Beneath its branches, she had placed the empty vial, once black with wax, now clear and open to the sky. She planted violets around it, the same scent that had once clung to Lysander's voice. In time, the flowers grew wild. Sometimes, when the breeze moved just right, she swore she heard a hum among the petals. Not a whisper, not a soul in need, just a gentle note of farewell. In the evenings, she lit candles in the apothecary, not to chase away fear, but to honor those who had come before. The light flickered softly against the glass, and the bottles no longer trembled. They glowed. One night, as the last flame dimmed and the stars gathered above, Elowen sat alone with a cup of chamomile tea and looked around the shop she had grown up in, the one she now tended with her own hands. She whispered a quiet thought into the room. Not a spell, not a ritual, just a simple wish. May we never fear the voices of the past, only listen with care. And somewhere, perhaps far beyond Elderhollow, or perhaps just within her, a voice answered back with warmth. You were always meant to hear us. The wind slipped gently through the open window, and the apothecary slept, bottled no more.